This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey there, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 191 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. High-impact tutoring has a wide body of evidence to support its efficacy. But how do you know what is and isn't high impact? Is it better to brand yourself as an academic coach or an executive functioning coach? Should executive functioning be a class in school, or should it be embedded into all the classes? I invited my colleague David Schipper to episode 191 to ponder some of these questions. David Schipper is the director of Strategic Learning Clinic, a position he has held since 2013. David obtained a B.A. in English Literature from Concordia University in 1998, as well as a B.Ed. in Secondary Education and English and History from McGill University in 2002. After some work as a local teacher in Montreal, David founded Tutorial Education Center in 2007. Aside from his ability to put both parents and students at ease, David uses his clinic's fairly unique approach to help get to the root cause of students' learning challenges and propose the most suitable remediation to resolve these weaknesses. As a father of two children, David knows how to relate to the concerns of parents, and as an experienced educator, understands the struggles of students. His passion and dedication to teaching and learning is second to none. In this conversation, we discuss the features of high-impact tutoring versus traditional tutoring, how are COVID high schoolers doing now that they're in college? Strategies are important, but can you use a strategy without content knowledge? And executive functioning in the schools, how should it look across tiers 1, 2, and 3? Before we get going, I wanted to mention the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers develop a strategic plan for putting executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams. Obviously, we talk a lot about executive functioning in this interview. David addresses it from the standpoint of someone who is offering private services to support students outside of school. But we can't really do that effectively if we don't understand what's happening in school. So there can be a great partnership between both the public and the private sector, or between the schools and people who provide services outside of the schools. And we get into a lot of those conversations in this interview. If you are somebody who is working in the schools, it's essential that you understand the bigger picture as well. And I help you do that in the School of Clinical Leadership. So we can think about across all the tiers of intervention that students have access to in the schools, how should that look when it comes to supporting students' executive functioning? If you are in a related service provider role, you might be working more with students who are getting special education services and are primarily focused on tier 2 and 3 intervention. But it's also really important to consider tier 1, which we discuss in this interview, as well as support students might have access to outside of school. So I help you put all of those pieces together and design effective intervention for executive functioning in the School of Clinical Leadership, and most importantly, help you collaborate with all of the stakeholders who may be involved. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this interview with David Schipper. Today, I am joined by David Schipper from Strategic Learning Clinic. So thank you so much for being here with me today and being a returning guest.
Thank you so much, Karen. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so we can do a really quick intro, but people can go back to episode 162, which was your first episode. But yeah, tell us quick intro and then we'll get into our conversation.
So I have been the director of Strategic Learning Clinic since 2013. The clinic was founded in 1989, though, up here in Quebec, Canada, as really a different kind of learning clinic, a different kind of learning center where students could learn skills instead of just providing traditional content-based tutoring. And so we still, at least in this country, in Canada, offer a really unique approach in addressing students' difficulties where we get to know the student and their needs before we start working with them. And just so people can go back to the other episode, but I am a certified educator in the province of Quebec. I have two university degrees, and one of them is in education. And the reason why I bring that up is because I read something that Natalie Wexler, who is
Mm-hmm.
a noted writer on education,
Yep.
wrote very recently that teachers and other educators criticized her for talking about education where she's not a licensed teacher,
I
right?
was wondering about that.
She doesn't have a bachelor's degree in education. And she said that even though she hasn't worked in K-12 education, she has spoken with many educators and like these are not just her opinions when she's writing a book or an article, and she has a new book coming out, which I'm looking forward to, which is going to talk more about literacy
Mm-hmm.
than her previous book. And so I am an educator, uh, and sometimes people listen to me, right? And listen to what I have to say, whether it's parents who come to us or school staff and so on. And I really think that there are many wonderful and valuable voices out there. And I'm an educator, and I can certainly learn from Natalie Wexler, who's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a trained educator. So that's important to just put out there.
Yeah, I agree. And I was wondering if she got any flack for that. And it sounds like she did. But so it's one of those things where I always do consider people's backgrounds, and it's a factor, but it's not the only factor. And I think I want to know if she hasn't been in a classroom, what has she done to find out about what she's writing about? Like as a journalist, you do research, and yes, some journalists put spin. I wouldn't say some, probably a lot of journalists put a spin on what they're writing, but yeah, I think that's really important because there are a lot of different people who come from different backgrounds that have a perspective. And I think the other thing is that teachers don't have time to put out journalism pieces. I mean, some of them do, but we need other people like researchers and journalists and consultants and all the other roles because teachers don't have time for all of that. They need somebody to speak on their behalf. So it is important.
It's just important to have many voices out there. We do not need to discount a valuable voice just because that person does not necessarily have a degree in the area that they're speaking about. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really think that that's important to say. Uh, and there are certainly many educators out there who are very, very knowledgeable, but may not have a great idea about how to run their school if they're an administrator, or
Mm-hmm.
a teacher who might be using uh, an approach that's not working for the majority of students.
Well, and I actually was having a conversation with a principal this morning about that, how sometimes there is somebody who might have been amazing in the classroom, but then they get into a role as an assistant principal or a principal or some other administrative role, and then they're having to think about budget and facilities and human resources. And, I mean, it depends on the size of the district, what you're responsible for, but it's a different skill set to manage people. It's a different skill set to be a journalist and know how to craft a story that people are going to read, and to handle the research and the marketing and the interviewing and the the publication process or the production if you're doing a podcast. So it's definitely not the same skill set. And I think that unfortunately, there are some journalists who speak on education that are great journalists, and they're great at spinning a story, and they do sometimes say things that, at least in my opinion, aren't helpful. But I am a fan of Natalie Wexler, because I do think that she's spreading information that is evidence-based and factual. And I just sometimes wonder if people who are critical are just like, oh, I don't like what this person is saying, so I'm going to find something that is going to try to discount what they're saying, even though it has nothing to do with the arguments that they're saying.
Well, that's absolutely true. Uh, so, I mean, we're going to talk about students today, but
Yeah.
adults also struggle with rigidity
Uh-huh.
and change. And so it's very easy to imagine educators who would be resentful of Natalie Wexler coming in and saying that education needs not a fix, because that's the wrong word, but adaptations, modifications. Can we say improvements, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like it's not a terrible thing to say that the education system in North America can be better.
Yeah.
It's not, why is it a terrible thing to say that? Right?
Yeah.
Why, like you could certainly look at Natalie Wexler's book and other writings as criticism, but it's she means well. She's
Mm-hmm.
not criticizing because she thinks that every teacher in North America is lousy and every school and every district is doing a terrible job, right? She means well. And so, like you said, some people are looking for things to criticize because they don't want things to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a way to give that, I don't want to say criticism, but say that things can be better. I think that messaging is a lot more helpful than, everything is broken, which I don't personally find that kind of messaging helpful, because when you say everything is broken, it makes you feel like there's nothing you can do. It gets people into, more of an apathetic mindset. And I don't find that particularly useful. I think pointing out where things can be better. I know, of course, unfortunately, the more polarizing and you sound, the easier it is for things to spread. So saying something that's nice and nuanced and diplomatic doesn't really get as much attention, unfortunately. So, making these big, bold statements like, this is crazy or whatever, unfortunately spreads more.
There, there should be a happy middle ground where
Yeah.
we can be provocative and, like you said before, leaning on data, right, at the same time. I think it is possible, right, to do both, and for some people to not have their hackles raised and immediately become defensive about it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a nice little, I didn't know we were going to go that direction, but what I originally had, what made me reach out for the second time was I had a reader reach out to me and ask me a question, and I thought it would be a really interesting discussion to have. And there's sort of a bigger question underneath it. But the question was, so this is somebody who has a lot of experience in education, so a lot of experience in the field working with students, and said, eventually I would like to have a coaching business where we focus on academic coaching and we support students with executive functioning. And my question was, are you going to be a company that focuses on supporting students with academics and does that by helping students build executive functioning skills, among other things that you would need support with if you were wanting to be better in school specifically? Or are you going to be a company that brands itself as we are an executive functioning coaching company that under that umbrella also works on academics, among other things that can be impacted by executive functioning? And so I think, I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it, but my initial thought was if you're saying that you're an executive functioning coach and you're only working on academics, is that complete? Or vice versa, if you are an academic coach and you've got a lot of skills to work on and you're only working on executive functioning, same thing, is that going to be complete? So, and I thought you might be a good person to have that conversation with wherever it may lead us, because I know that you are a tutoring company and you also end up working a lot on executive functioning, but yeah. So where should we go
So
with that?
I uh, I I've been reading about this lately about high impact tutoring,
Yeah,
right? That phrase has come up.
it has for me
And
as well.
and when people hear in that do what I do hear the word tutoring, we often think traditional content-based tutoring, right? So a homework helper or
Mm-hmm.
someone to help a student prepare for the test on Friday and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
what's really meant by that phrase is a professional who is going to work with a student or a small group of students if it's taking place in a school at least a few times a week. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so a professionally trained educator focus on building a relationship, high quality materials, a program, a remedial program. So I think about remediation when I hear that phrase. And executive function teaching is not necessarily remediation, although it could be remedial.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought process here is in terms of the two different approaches is that if we're going to work on executive function and isolate just based on that to help a student with their schoolwork, prepare for the next test, but also everything that goes along with it, help them plan, help them manage their time, help with task initiation,
Mm-hmm.
and so on.
And all the other
We
things that you could put under that umbrella that go beyond school. I mean, you could keep
exactly,
going.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, if you're going to be an executive function coach, uh, who's not really focused purely on academics, and academics is not the umbrella on top,
Mm-hmm.
and you like you layer the executive function there. If you're going to do that approach, then you really have to get to know the student or students if you're working in a small group really well. And I really favor one-on-one here because every student's executive function challenges are different. And so you really have to get to know the student and what are they grappling with? How's their working memory? How's their cognitive flexibility? And the other things I mentioned earlier to like let's try and measure them if we can, right? We have tools to measure some of these things. Let's measure them and see, well, what is this person grappling with? We could do it qualitatively. Students are really honest about their weaknesses, I find, right? Like over the years, if you were to ask someone between like for executive function, where I'm thinking more of like age 10 to age 18, let's say, they're very honest about their organizational skills, their time management skills, their planning skills, and so on. Qualitatively, you can build a program based on self-assessment, even as a good jumpstart. It wouldn't necessarily be complete, but you could certainly really do a lot of important work that way. And so the other approach, which is to look at academics and insert executive function wherever it fits,
Mm-hmm.
right, within the academics. So if you're
Yeah.
working on math, for example, right, to like metacognition is something that comes into play a lot in the
Right.
realm of math. So that's an example, and we can certainly talk about that later. That's an example of helping a student with a subject in school, such as math, and seeing an opportunity to improve an executive function or two related to that subject. Like you said before, there's no right or wrong unless you choose to do neither,
Yeah.
which is often what is happening.
So what
So,
would
so
you say, just to like just tease out these approaches? So we're saying that something like someone who brands themselves as an executive functioning coach could include academic coaching services, therapeutic services under the menu of services that they offer, depending on what the student needs. So that is a way that could make sense to pair those two things together that way. Or you could go the other way around and market yourself as an academic services company and pull executive functioning in where it fits and specifically focus on academics. And I would say that in the second scenario, that if in order to be successful, you would want to be pulling an executive functioning. I know that some people don't specifically work on academics and they work on executive functioning for other non-academic things. And I think that is okay as well, as long as you're transparent and don't say, well, I'm going to help your child learn to read by working on their executive functioning, but we're not actually going to work on reading skills. Obviously, that would be unethical, but you could, as long as you're being transparent about it, I think it's just what do you want to be about? But you're saying there's another option, which is to not do either. And so would this be, well, I want to come back to the high impact tutoring definition, but what would it look like in your mind to not do either? Not work on academics or work on executive functioning?
so
Low
what
impact
I'm
tutoring?
so what I'm thinking is this. For me, and again, this is just my opinion, I think that executive function should be taught as a subject in school. That's my opinion. So I'll
Mhm.
explain. For
Okay.
me, executive function as a course, as a mandatory course, is as important as English, math, social studies, etc., whatever other subjects. But
Mhm.
those three subjects I would think are commonly taught in school in North America. And in my opinion, executive function should be taught as often as those subjects are, in my opinion. And again, now that I've said that, we can talk about using the two approaches either in an executive function class or in teaching a subject and inserting executive function into it. What I'm
Mhm.
basically saying is this: executive function has only very recently become well known, or better known, I should say,
Mhm. Yeah.
as something that schools should look at more and more.
Mhm.
And I, and again, I'm willing to go all the way on this idea and say this is such an important concept, set of tools that, as we're going to talk about today, students need not just in school, but in life, in the workplace. If these skills are as important as I think they are, and you think they are, then let's make them really, really important as English, math, and social studies, social science, in
Yeah.
my opinion. That again, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Like we're we're teaching reading in school, varying degrees of success. We're teaching math in school, varying degrees of success. We're teaching other subjects, varying degrees of success on that as well. Let's try implementing executive function in school uh, in a way that it hasn't been and has never been. So now let's tease out the two methods. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so one method is we're going to talk about executive function. We're going to have an executive function class, and we will insert academic ideas and concepts in a conversation about executive function, but we're really talking only about executive function and inserting academics where applicable.
Mm-hmm.
In the other idea, the other like door number two, if you will,
Yeah.
every teacher is talking about executive function in his or her classroom.
See, I
Where
think in an ideal world, you need door number two. Like that's a non-negotiable for me. But maybe door number one could also work in conjunction with door number two. Like I don't know how you don't embed it because a lot of the students who struggle with executive functioning, the carryover is an issue. So if you don't have some mechanism for pulling it over, then it's challenging. So I think you need door number two, but I'm definitely interested in seeing what door number one would look like. Like I know that a lot of therapists will try to do that with a therapy session or social skills group, which if that is a front loading tool, then I'm on board with it. But if it's like this is how I see the entire intervention and there's no transfer over or no person reminding them of like here's where you can apply those skills that you did in your therapy session, then I've not known anybody who's gotten great results when it's just isolated like that. So we need to go into both doors, in my opinion.
well, I agree. That's why I'm
Yeah.
suggesting that we have an executive function class, let's say a 30-minute class, right?
Yeah.
Especially at the elementary school level
Mm-hmm.
or middle school level. It doesn't have to be a long class if we're just talking about executive function and inserting academics into that. But
Yeah.
I think
Going both
to
ways.
to talk about door number one, I think that teachers need better training
Yeah.
and better knowledge about executive function and other things, of course, too, like how to teach reading and math and so on, it as well. But I think if we're going to move in this direction and recognize that executive function strengths play a pivotal role, okay, in one's
Mm-hmm.
success, then we have to have a close look at training teachers to be able to layer or bake the executive function skills into their teaching. So I'm just going to illustrate this. Okay.
Okay.
So we work with elementary school students and high school students primarily, although we're working with more college and university students than ever before because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the pandemic, local students did not have to write board exams, and so their hitting a brick wall was postponed by a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years, let's say, and then they got to college and they were asked to write an exam in a course or read a book for a course, and they had never really been asked to do that before on an exam, which the board exams require skills. The local history exam here in Quebec
Yeah.
requires top-notch reading comprehension and writing skills, among other things. And if you don't have to write that exam and you automatically graduate from high school, then you simply you're postponing that. So elementary school students come to us and we have a look at their history, the assessments and report cards and individual education plans and so on. And we take a look at, okay, what are the teacher comments? Why is this person not a successful classroom learner? And we see, well, they have a weak working memory. They've been diagnosed with ADHD. Their processing speed is weak. They've done the brief. The
Mm-hmm.
psychologist has done the brief, and other weaknesses are apparent as well. And so the picture begins. to build in my mind, and I take a look at it and I see a student who has fallen behind in school, partly because their executive functions are weak. And it impacts them across the board. It impacts their ability to learn. Like in a subject like math, for example,
Mm-hmm.
once you fall significantly behind, it's really hard to catch up. And that's true of
Yeah.
reading and reading
Mm-hmm.
comprehension and developing language skills. It's true of many different things. And so I see that every day in my work that students are falling further and further behind. And so when we're talking about executive function in the classroom and incorporating this in schools, it's more of a holistic approach is than is currently the case. And so certainly why can't we take from both options? Why
Yeah.
can't we train teachers to layer executive function into their teaching? They're like math teachers, for example.
Yeah.
And also, why can't we have uh, specialists who specialize in executive function who are really knowledgeable about executive function and just have a short class somewhere during the school week where we reinforce that as well, because then the students, it's the best of both worlds, because the students are seeing executive function in action, but at the same time they're working with that specialist who is explicitly teaching what are the executive functions. uh, where do you stand on these? Do you see what I mean? Like in the
Yeah.
classroom, the teacher can bake in the executive function into the teaching. But if we leave out explicit executive function teaching, I think, in my opinion, we're doing a bit of a disservice to students.
Well, and I think like what you were saying about how why can't we address it from both angles? I think for some students you need to, and that's where you have your multi-tiered system where you have support at the tier 1 level where it's baked into the curriculum for all the students, and for some kids that's going to be enough, but for the other kids who where it's not enough, you have some support in the classroom, and the teachers maybe have access to some additional tools in their toolbox to pull out for students who do need some additional above and beyond things in the classroom. And then you also have the option of them getting services from a related services professional. And that's really the approach that I advocate for both. But where I'm a lot of the people that I'm working with are going the other way, where maybe it's not addressed as much at tier 1 and they're trying to address it with tier 3 by only doing the direct intervention, and that doesn't work when you don't also have it embedded into the curriculum. So you said something a few minutes ago that I wanted to ask you about. You said that you were consistently seeing students fall behind, that you had students who they're older now after the pandemic because they didn't have to take their board exams. So I'm curious if that was like the cause or the effect. So was it that we didn't identify the students who needed help earlier because they didn't take the board exam, and now they're realizing that they needed support now that they're in college, so we didn't catch them? Or was it the preparation for the board exam that didn't give them the skills that they needed to be successful? Which one do you think it is?
So let me first talk about this board exam here in Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
So every student in Quebec, whether they're writing the exam in English or French, has to pass the history course. And at the end of the grade 10 year, they have to write a board exam that is largely skills based. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
if you gave me a student in Des Moines, Iowa, who read 700-page historical novels in her spare time and writes so beautifully you could cry weeping tears of joy, that teenage girl is guaranteed to get an 80 on the history exam here in Quebec. Now, think about that for a moment. The teenage girl in Des Moines, Iowa is really bright, has great skills, but she knows nothing about Canadian history, not
Mm-hmm.
one thing. She is guaranteed to get a mark between 80 and 90 on the board exam.
And why is that? Because it's skills based versus content based. So it's asking,
Exactly.
so is it's presenting information and you have to look at the information. You have to know where to find the information to
So
do whatever the task is.
I'll illustrate for you.
Yeah.
So here's a sample question. On what precise point concerning federal-provincial relations do the two historians' interpretations differ? Now, let that sit for a moment. The language of the questions
Yeah. Yeah.
is too sophisticated for 40% of the students because that's the failure rate every time the board exam is given, province-wide. 40% is the failure rate. So you have lost students at the question mark, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
You've lost them. I have students have told me I didn't understand any word after what,
Yeah.
and that was the
So
second word in the question.
I wouldn't say it's a where you get into the content versus skills, if you do not have that syntactic structure in your system, which you could argue is it's like, is it content? Is it a skill? That's where it gets a little fuzzy for me because, again, a lot of times people they try to go to the comprehension strategies when students don't have the syntactic structures or the vocabulary knowledge. You do need knowledge in order to be able to comprehend that question. But you're right, it's not content relating to Canadian history. It's more broader, what you would say tier two vocabulary that applies across a lot of situations. So it is content, but it's a specific kind of content. You're talking about tier two vocabulary versus tier three vocabulary, where you have enough tier two vocabulary that you can do the task to learn what you need to do in order to find the information you need. So that again, that's where I think that sometimes when we get into like content learning versus inquiry based learning, where it runs together for me a little bit.
I want to make it clear that the historians' interpretations are provided on the exam. The
Okay,
texts
yeah,
are
yeah,
provided,
I got
right? I
that.
just want to make that
Yeah,
make
but
that
you
clear
don't
in
just have
case.
to know some random historians
No, no, no,
that,
no, no, no. It's not really an exam you can study for a great
right.
deal. Now,
Mm-hmm.
having said that, if you know the material perfectly but have limited skills, that's 20% in your back pocket. It
Yeah.
could be the difference between passing and failing if you manage to understand more questions than not.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have an issue with the exam itself. My issue is that it's purely content in the classroom. Okay. We're teaching only content and we're not teaching the history teachers say, well, it's my job to teach the content. I'm
Oh, I
under an
see what you're
enormous amount
saying.
of
Yeah.
pressure.
So they're not
I'm
teaching the
under
skills in
no,
addition to the
no,
content, like at the same time, which is really what you should do.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the history teachers feel an enormous amount of pressure to get through the curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
all the content. And I'm sure many of them are thinking, well, it's the English teacher's job to teach them the skills that are needed on this exam. My job is just to teach them the content.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not happening
Well,
for
that's where
so many.
like the executive functioning skills need to be embedded into the content. Another case for that.
Absolutely, that's
Mm-hmm.
true, right?
Yeah.
And so for 40% of students, this exam is a total ambush,
Mm-hmm.
right? They've never seen it before. They don't have the skills. They don't even know where to begin to really have success on this exam. The final question is an essay. Writing is a high level skill, uh, and it like it's a short essay that these students have to write. It's 100, I believe it's 150 words.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's an English teacher whom I know who says, David, that's not an essay, that's a sneeze. 150 words. But if you think about it,
Yeah. That's
that that paragraph, that long paragraph has to be a fairly good piece of writing in order to get the marks. And the question just prior to that on the exam is composing an outline for a paragraph that you're not writing based on it's another question entirely. And so you can see there's I don't mind the exam itself. The issue is that we're not teaching the skills. And so increasingly, we're seeing many college and university students who didn't have to write this exam. And like when a parent calls me for the first time and says, my child's 19 years old or 21 years old, really quickly during that phone call, I find out that they didn't have to write that grade 10 history exam. And so they got a free pass to a high school diploma, and now they're struggling. It's not unheard of for us to work with students in their late teens and early 20s who haven't mastered decoding.
Yeah.
Never mind all the other skills.
Yeah. So that's a good segue. Okay, so I have to go back to this before we move on. But so we talked about high impact tutoring, which it's like, it just seems almost like, it almost seems silly that you have to say that, because who's going to sign up for low impact tutoring? Like, I want my tutoring to not have an impact, but I get it. You gotta brand it the right way. But so when we're saying high impact tutoring, we're talking about blending skills and content together, I'm assuming, and like making it individualized versus here's the worksheet that you have to do this week, and I'm going to pair you up with somebody who hasn't done an evaluation. Like, is that what we're talking about? Just that there's more of a diagnostic process and customization versus let's just get the work done?
So the National Education Association published an article relatively recently, earlier this year, that discussed the research behind high impact or high dosage tutoring to address post-COVID learning recovery. So, and again, backed up by data, an increasing number of researchers, school leaders, and classroom teachers who have seen the practice in action state that where it has been properly implemented, high impact tutoring produces large learning gains for a wide range of students, particularly those who have fallen behind academically. It has been shown to be 20 times more effective than standard tutoring models for math and 15 times more effective for reading. Studies demonstrate that the practice increases students' learning by an additional 3 to 15 months across grade levels. So the pillars are frequent sessions, 30 minutes longer if possible during the school day, one-on-one or small group sessions. Again, we could talk about that in a little while. Professionally trained educators leading, right? Very, very important. A focus on relationship building by having students meet with the same professionally trained educators for each session. And again, high quality materials and programs that align with goals. And then finally, the US Department of Education conducted a survey in December 2022 that found that only 11% of public school students participate in these programs.
That's all very interesting. So, and I'm assuming standard tutoring models are more like just what I was saying, where it's just kind of, what's your homework? Let's get the homework done, versus let's work on the skills that are preventing you from getting your homework done and being able to do this homework assignment independently. I'm going to take a quick break here to talk about the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers design programming and interventions to support students' executive functioning in school settings. Social skills groups are often seen as the entire intervention. And when they're delivered this way, they're often done in an academic format where an adult is leading the session and kids are answering questions or discussing various social rules and scenarios. This is a very small piece of what needs to happen. When we think of social skills intervention as just a lesson plan or social skills group, Kids get really good at answering questions about how they should be acting in hypothetical situations. However, they often don't transfer any of those things over to real life. This is because real social interactions are not academic situations. We're actually not working on the skills preventing kids from using the information and knowledge we're trying to give them. In other words, we're not building the executive functioning skills kids need to be successful in social situations, not to mention other areas of life. Before you can successfully implement social skills intervention, you need to have a solid understanding of what executive functioning is, both the internal skills and the external behaviors, what successful intervention looks like and who needs to be involved, and what service delivery models can effectively address executive functioning. This is exactly what I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership. In the program, you'll learn why kids continue to experience anxiety or behavioral challenges, even though they're going to therapy or have a behavior plan, common mistakes multidisciplinary teams make when teaching executive functioning, and how to correct these mistakes, why kids struggle with problem solving and friendships even though they're going to pull out therapy and social skills groups, and most importantly, how to help your team work together to figure out solutions to all of these things. If you are in a related service provider role, if you're a speech pathologist, social worker, counselor, psychologist, occupational therapist, or other professional on a school team supporting students, you can emerge into a leadership role on your team and help to guide these interventions. I help you do that in the School of Clinical Leadership. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership.
High impact tutoring is certainly an approach that can yield benefits. My concern, or one of my concerns, is that, again, going back to the small group aspect of it, what if one or two students in that small group fall behind in comparison to others who are learning more slowly than the others, picking up the skills a little bit more slowly than the others? What happens then? What's your fallback position then? Schools don't often have an answer to that, again,
Yeah,
because
they
the
absolutely
resources.
don't. And they don't for therapy either, because I know therapists that are like, I'm seeing students in groups of 8, or other. I spoke with an SLP the other day who said that they will get criticized if their administrator looks at their schedule and says, "Why are you seeing this student one-on-one? You should be seeing them in a group because, you know, it's okay that your caseload is over 100." I mean, so it really does impact. Well, with therapy, it really depends on the state you're in and the laws about caseload caps. But for tutoring, it's obviously different because it's a different type of program and service, but there's certainly overlaps, and the same issue presents in that you can't address the specific goals at the student's level if they're all at different levels. It becomes very challenging.
So that is really a key element. If we want our education system in North America to improve, there's no doubt that we need more resources. We need more money in the system. That's true, because we could have more therapists and more educators and so on. My concern, though, is that we're not necessarily allocating the money in properly or intelligently right now. When I walk into a school, there are so many behavior technicians, aides in the classroom, uh, guidance counselors, therapists, etc. And I'm wondering to myself, is all of that wisely allocated? And I'm not sure if it is. Instead of using that approach, which is, okay, Tim is behaving poorly, so we have to send him out of the classroom because he's a distraction to all the other students. So instead of dealing with again, the behavior, I'm going back to like, why don't we look at, well, what's the root cause, or what are the root causes for his poor behavior in the classroom? I really do feel that every child wants to succeed. But what if a child has given up on that goal, given
Yeah.
up on success because they have no hope of taking in the information auditorily and visually in the classroom, and their skills have fallen so far below age and grade level that there's no hope. Like, I will always remember this. There was a grade 11 math student I met a few years ago, and he said to me, "I don't understand probability." And I said, "Well, tell me more. Like, what is it that you don't understand?" "Well, it involves percent and decimal and fractions, and I never understood those things. And so I'm totally lost." So that's a student that he's been totally lost for a long time now. It's
Mm-hmm.
not as if probability is the only area in math where he's struggling. He's been struggling across the board. He didn't pass grade 10 math, and he's trying to pass grade 11 math. At a certain point, we're doing students a disservice by not addressing what's at the root of their difficulties. And it's complex. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not suggesting that these are easy peasy solutions. They're not. Reading is still not uh, taught optimally. Let's put it that way so I don't get myself in trouble. Reading
Mm-hmm.
is still not taught optimally in schools across North America because teachers do not all have the training to teach reading, which is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. And I feel like it will be very, very slowly addressed and not addressed uniformly across districts.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
so it,
I mean,
and
there's
again,
still so many districts that still are like all about three queuing and oh, they don't want to let that go. Um, I mean, I think like when you were talking about all those different therapists that are in the classroom, and I think that, I always am very clear when I'm talking about executive functioning, when I'm talking about language, that I would never say that kids shouldn't have like a counselor or somebody safe that they can talk to. But if you are showing behaviors because you struggle with reading and you are avoiding because you're embarrassed and because you're so frustrated that like you've gotten further and further behind, then talking about your feelings in a therapy session is not going to make you a better reader. Yes, you might need to talk with a therapist in that session about things that you're experiencing for other reasons and for other purposes, but it's not going to teach you to read. And I see this with the way that people talk about play-based learning as well, where we know that that's so important, but play is not going to teach you to read. It's not going to teach you math. It's not going to teach you the other content areas that you need. So I think that sometimes we need to realize like what is the actual issue here. One time I was watching a presentation for somebody who was talking about how to put some scaffolding in place, which I did think that what she was sharing had some utility. She's talking about how to give purposeful praise and, like, that kind of thing. It was leaning towards behavioral. And one example she gave is like, okay, you've got a student who's showing a lot of behaviors, and like what you're going to do with him is like, when you're gonna intentionally give some positive attention here. And she gave this example and she described how she would work with the student on reading, and it was like, I was like, that is not how you teach reading. And I'm like, that's great that you're giving that student some positive attention. And maybe it is useful for that from that standpoint. But I hope you're not teaching reading that way, because those behaviors are going to continue in reading if that student does not get the support that they need. It was like, I'm going to go through and help him memorize all his words. And I was like, I
one
didn't
of
say
the
anything because it wasn't the point of the presentation, but that's immediately where my head went.
one of the things that uh, perturbs me a little bit is that schools don't know how badly some of the students are struggling
Yeah.
with skills. And so if, let's say, a child has a mysterious illness and it's gotten really bad, they're taken to the hospital. The doctors will run some tests to determine what the difficulty is in an effort to try to remediate it. Why are we not doing that in schools? And when I say that, what I mean to say is we are evaluating a very small number of students in each school. Depending on their resources, that number will fluctuate. And so here locally, here in one of the public school boards, they evaluate 10 students in a year in a particular elementary school, let's say. The psychologist is shared between 5 of the public schools in that board, and the psychologist is present at each school 1 day per week and does 10 assessments for a total of 50 in the 5 schools in a year. That's not necessarily sufficient in a school of 500 students to do only 10 assessments. And so which 10 students have won the lottery to be selected for an assessment? Well, I'm not suggesting, by the way, for any parent who might be listening to this, but what invariably happens is if Tim, poor Tim, again, picking on him, but if Tim is displaying physical aggression in the classroom, he is more likely to be assessed sooner than Sally, who is struggling with the same issues as Tim, but is not displaying any behavioral challenges whatsoever.
I would agree with that, but I don't know that Tim would be assessed for the right things in that scenario. That's there might be, here's our behavioral intervention plan, which maybe that also needs to be in place. But um I would we automatically say, you know what, maybe the student needs a language evaluation, or we need to look at reading and math or whatever areas are relevant. I don't know that we would be looking at a full comprehensive evaluation for that scenario.
I'm glad you brought that up because the psychologist at the school board that works at the 5 schools is often doing the WISC and the WIAT and nothing else. So the WISC, a full WISC, selected subtests from the WIAT often, not a full WIAT, but selected subtests, and perhaps the teacher is filling out the usual questionnaire and the parent is filling out the usual questionnaire, and that's it. That's the entire assessment. And like you said, it's not sufficient because we still don't really have a grasp of the full picture of what the student is struggling with.
Well, and I would say even like I don't know that in some scenarios we'd even get to the point of doing a WISC or a WIAT. Like at least not that I'm saying that's comprehensive. Obviously, you would need more than that if you're going to get a complete picture for a student in many cases, but I don't know, like if you're giving those 2 tests, you at least know that you're looking at academics. But if you're just seeing behaviors, like I don't know that people would even get to that step that the psychologist is doing that type of evaluation. So, I mean, I can think of many instances where unless there's also a very clear, I'm just thinking of some students that I've worked with, and I would say that in the younger grades, that is sometimes if it gets to the point where the student is in a special education classroom, they are looking at academics. But for the older students, especially secondary school, especially high school, I don't know that they're doing that evaluation. I would almost guarantee you that in a lot of cases they're not even thinking, oh, we should look at something besides behavior, and and then those students are just getting detentions and suspensions, and things are starting to spiral and get worse. So I would I know what we wanted to talk about, just back on the topic of, how you want to brand your company, but I think that the other thing that you want to think about when you are offering services, whether it be coaching or tutoring, is that the way that you explain what you do is going to impact what people come to you for. And you have said in the past that sometimes parents will come to you for one issue and you realize you need to work on another. And we were going to talk about math, but I don't know if we'll get to it, but we can try. But let's talk about the first thing that I said there, which is what does it look like when somebody comes to you for one issue that you can help with, but you realize there's other things?
So some parents go on our website and treat our website like a restaurant menu. Okay. And I'm not being critical here,
Yeah.
right? Like you go to a restaurant and some of the menu items look more appealing than others. And you say to yourself, well, they offer a program called visualizing and verbalizing. My child struggles with reading comprehension. Maybe that might be a good fit,
Mm-hmm.
right? They really seem to be having a hard time with that. And then we talk with the family, we get to know them, we do testing, and we find out that that child doesn't even know how to decode. But the parent is really stuck on on that. They say, well, you know, he's memorized like enough words to kind of get by, we feel. Can we just skip the whole learning how to read
Do
and
people really
and
say that?
oh, all the time,
Oh my gosh.
all the
That's
time,
wow.
all the time, right? And it's really important for me to say this out loud. Many students hide the fact
Mm-hmm.
that their reading ability is based largely on having memorized, admittedly, thousands of sight words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there are so many students who, like when we go over the assessment report that we produce, the parents say, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that my child didn't know how to read words that they haven't memorized.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the time we are successful in saying to this family, we strongly encourage you to have one of our teachers teach decoding and spelling. The Lindemood phoneme sequencing program really works on both.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very good program. It's a science-based program that's been around for some 55 years. And some parents will listen to us and say, well, that's a good idea. Tim really needs to learn how to read. But not everyone feels that way. And some families will come to us and say, my child is struggling in math. And again, that's true. They are correct. We do a key math assessment and they are weak in math. Okay. With older students, it's especially important to do at least the first half, those first five subtests of the key math to determine their skill set. Because like, let's face it, a high school student, while in a perfect world, they would be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide on paper. They have calculators to help them with those things. And so it's not as absolutely essential to do every single subtest of the key math if all you really want to know is what is their skill set, which is the first five subtests. So again, going back to that idea, parents come to us for math and we evaluate their math skills, but we're also evaluating their reading and language skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then we discover that there are other issues that are very important to address. Okay, so this is a question I'm putting out there. Is it more important to address reading and language challenges, or is it more important to address the issue that the family has come to you for, which is not at all reading a language. They've come to you for math. And just as an aside, there are many tutoring centers around the globe that provide math tutoring, and there's loads of online tutors that provide math tutoring. And traditional content-based math tutoring is getting the student ready for the next test. Whereas a learning clinic such as ours, what we do is, because we know all of the different areas where they're struggling, we go back and fill in the missing bricks in their foundational skills. We go back and teach them what they didn't properly learn in the previous grade or grades. So it's with the older students, it's a hybrid approach where we recognize that they have to pass the exam at the end of the year. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a race against the clock to work on their current material with an eye towards filling in missing skill gaps as we go. But the biggest issue is this: because the education system is currently not optimal, because there are so many challenging things in our education system, and the fact that we don't train the teachers to teach these subjects, teach the skills, to the fact that students are coming in with learning challenges that they've had for years, uh, to complicate matters. The system is not able to cope with the myriad challenges that students present. And so when when parents come to us with their 14-year-old child or 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old child, and they say our child is struggling in school, they're getting 30 to 40% in multiple classes. That's late. That is so late to start to address the challenges. Now, something happened uh, like a few weeks ago that hasn't happened before, at least for me. We met a new family, uh, a 15-year-old boy who's reading and language skills in English and French, because that's the primary language up here in Quebec,
Mm-hmm.
are so far below grade level that he has no hope of passing any of his subjects. He goes to a unilingual French school on top of that. And French is not his mother tongue or language of mastery. Again, let's put that aside. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
So this, unfortunately, tragically, unbeknownst to me, the uh, when I first met the mother, um, she said, like, she kept saying, I'm really not feeling well. We'll have to postpone our meeting. And we had a meeting with the school, with the incoming vice principal at the school. He's going into 10th grade. And during that meeting, the incoming vice principal said, okay, we'll consider putting in some supports to help him. But to be honest, he really just needs to try harder. We feel that if he would just try harder, he would pass. There is no way that he could try harder and that his effort would result in a 60 in any of these classes. There's no way. There's no way. His skills are so far below grade level. Now, here's the part that I wanted to express. The mother had stomach cancer and died literally just a short time after that meeting. And it saddened me and shook me up so much because, to be honest, it was her dying wish that her son would go to a different school, to an English school that would be better suited to him. And so it saddens me, and this is probably true if you were to speak with any learning clinic or learning center director. The most difficult part of my job is when someone contacts me and says, my 15-year-old needs help. Because invariably, or almost invariably, that student has slipped through the cracks for many years now. Now, parents don't know where to turn. And certainly it like, again, not judging parents, but the reason why not all of the families and parents who contact me are parents of grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 students is because parents don't necessarily have the information. And at that level, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, some people are telling them, don't worry, he'll grow out of it.
Yeah, that is
Don't
very
don't don't
problematic.
don't worry. It's just a passing phase. He'll catch up.
Or I've heard people say like, don't worry, just like let him go play outside, or don't worry, it's just not, developmentally appropriate or something to that effect when, it's the gaps are widening.
And so the hardest, again, and going to like along with what you've just said, the hardest part of my job is that family that I'm meeting on Friday, that boy's 7 years old, right? And that's my ideal student, my ideal client, if you will. When they're 17 years old and reading at a grade 1 level or grade 2 or grade 3 at a math level that's similar, it's so much harder to catch up. And the parents say, well, can you catch them up by December? And the answer is no, I can't. We can't. And so whose fault is it? It's not about assigning blame. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about everyone looking in the mirror and saying, I need help here.
I don't know. I mean, I think that sometimes we get stuck on like thinking about the more advanced skill before the foundational skills are there. Um, and I guess one more question because I know we're past the top of the hour. Um, I've I'm just thinking about, if you are a company that focuses on academics and that's what you do really well, and you've got a student that comes to you and you realize that they need all the things. Like they have issues with decoding. They have issues with language. Maybe they don't have a good syntactic system. And so they're going to struggle with some of that language on those assessments or many other things, not just assessments. I've had many conversations about how those complex syntax skills are not just about passing tests in school. So let's say that they have that going on. Maybe they're also struggling socially, and then they've got some things going on at home where just day-to-day tasks and strategic planning. So they've got all kinds of things going on. So you as a tutoring company or a tutoring clinic that provides those services, how do you handle that professionally when like maybe the parents coming to you for one thing and you need to direct them to another thing, but what about when going back to the conversation of academics versus executive functioning, how do you think about supporting that family? Like, are you trying to just guide them for what you have in house and then make some additional referrals? Like, how do you think about that?
So again, not to be apportioning blame here, but many of the parents we meet have also struggled in school when they were younger. Okay. That's absolutely true. Whenever we meet a new family, we always have them fill out a pre-consultation questionnaire. And on many, many occasions, certainly the majority of the time, there are history of learning difficulties on one or both sides of the family. So when we meet a new family, we're not thinking only of our services. We're also thinking of other professionals in the area who could potentially help this student or at the very least, diagnose. Let's say we refer them to an audiologist for a suspected auditory processing disorder, or we refer them to what's called a developmental or behavioral optometrist to investigate suspected issues with their visual system. Okay, to give a couple of examples. We're always looking at the child holistically. What's everything they need to work on? Everything. Like if money was no object and this child wasn't in school 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, what could we do with this student to improve their academic and cognitive skill sets so that they could be the best they can be? That is really our goal. We want every single student to be the best that they can be. And we can certainly teach anyone how to read, right? Almost anyone, right? 99% of the, or 99.9% of the students who come our way, we could have them decode within a certain period of time, depending on their current skill set. But what happens to everyone else who doesn't develop the skills and they get tutored a little bit? What happens if a family can't afford our services or any services? What happens to those people? I read this recently that reading and the learning of reading, learning how to decode, is the number one civil rights issue of our time.
Yeah, I've heard that in some initiatives that are going on. I know there's the Right to Read initiative in Ontario. So, but where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
So they can go onto our website, which is strategiclearning.ca. That's really the best way to look at our restaurant menu, as I said before, look at what we do. And our approach, it's unique, it's different, just to really get your feet wet. Obviously, we're on social media. You can contact us by phone, but that's really the best way to just have a peek at what we do and the relative uniqueness of strategic learning clinics still, at least in this country.
Yeah. So high impact tutoring.
High impact tutoring. Yeah. Definitely.
All right. Well, we'll link to everything. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all the resources that were mentioned in this episode. And be sure to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers put executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams using multiple service delivery models. So I show you how to do direct intervention, and I also show you how to coach and train others so that you can ensure students get support across their day. Remember that it helps me so much if you tell your friends and colleagues about De Facto Leaders, and if you follow me and leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify or another podcast network. And finally, if you're interested in collaborating with me, if you'd like to invite me to be on your podcast, if you would like to be a guest on De Facto Leaders, or if you have a suggestion for a guest for De Facto Leaders, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.